The chains around my ankles chimed like broken bells with each step I took. The sound echoed across the marble floor of the great hall, mixing with the hushed whispers and occasional cruel laughter of the court nobles. They watched me, the unwanted Omega, the lowest of our kind, with eyes that glinted like polished stones in the light of 100 candles. I felt their gazes crawling over my skin like insects, leaving invisible trails of shame. The air in the great hall was thick with the mingling scents of expensive perfumes, roasted meats, and the sickly sweet aroma of fermented berries in goblets of wine. But beneath it all, I could smell their excitement, that distinct, sharp scent of anticipation that rose whenever they gathered to watch me dance. It was the scent of predators waiting for their prey to stumble. "Dance, Omega," Lord Devereux commanded from his high-backed chair, his voice carrying the weight of authority that all high-ranking alphas possessed. "Dance for your supper." My stomach clenched with hunger and humiliation. 3 days had passed since I'd last been allowed a proper meal, 3 days of scraps and water, all to ensure I would perform with appropriate desperation at tonight's feast. The annual Crimson Moon celebration, when the noble houses gathered to reaffirm alliances and flaunt their power. I raised my gaze just enough to see the long table laden with food, glistening meats, mountains of roasted vegetables, and pastries dusted with sugar that sparkled like fresh snow. My mouth watered, and I swallowed hard, trying to maintain what little dignity I had left. My grandmother's voice whispered in my memory, "Even when they chain your body, Lyra, never let them chain your spirit. In silence and survival lies power they cannot understand." The small wooden pendant she had given me, carved with the ancient symbol of the forgotten Omega Queens, hung hidden beneath my thin dancing dress, pressing against my skin like a secret promise. I took a deep breath and began to move. The music started, haunting strings and a rhythm that pulsed like a heartbeat. I let my body follow it, transforming my shame into grace, my pain into beauty. The chains limited my movement, forcing me to adapt, to find ways to flow despite their restriction. This was the cruel irony. They meant to humiliate me with these bonds. Yet over the years, I had learned to incorporate them into my dance, making them seem almost like ornaments rather than shackles. "Look how she's learned to love her chains," a woman's voice remarked, followed by tittering laughter. Lady Marceline, with her perfect alpha features and cruelty that ran bone deep. I kept my eyes lowered, focusing on the swirling patterns in the marble floor. If I looked up, if I saw their smirking faces, I might falter, and faltering meant punishment. As I turned in a careful spin, my gaze accidentally lifted toward the main entrance of the great hall. My breath caught. There, standing in the massive doorway, was a figure I had never seen before. Tall, imposing, with shoulders that seemed to block the light from the corridor beyond. Even from this distance, I could sense it. The overwhelming presence of an alpha unlike any other. Not just any alpha, but one whose power felt ancient, primal. The king had arrived. Alpha King Orion Blackthorn. The ruler who had been away for years, fighting wars at the northern borders, securing our realm against the savage feral packs. The king whose return had been announced only yesterday, sending the court into a frenzy of preparation and panic. My step faltered. The music seemed to fade into a distant hum as our eyes met across the expanse of the hall. His eyes were not what I expected. In the stories whispered among the servants, Alpha King Orion was described as merciless, cold, calculating, a warrior king with eyes of steel. But the eyes that found mine were amber, almost golden in the candlelight, and within them burned something that made my heart stutter in my chest. Recognition. Not of who I was. He couldn't possibly know me, but of something deeper. "Why has the music stopped?" Lord Devereux's voice cut through the sudden silence, sharp with annoyance. "Continue, Omega. The king's arrival doesn't excuse your duties." I tore my gaze away from the king's and forced my body back into motion. But something had changed. My movements felt different, as though his gaze had awakened something dormant within me, something dangerous. The court rose in a wave of rustling silks and scraping chairs, as the king strode into the hall. No one had expected him to appear at the feast. He had returned to the capital only hours ago, and tradition dictated a formal reception the following day. "Your Majesty." Lord Devereux bowed deeply, his voice suddenly honeyed with deference. "We are honored by your unexpected presence." I kept dancing, moving through the practiced motions while trying to make myself invisible. Omegas were not meant to draw the attention of kings. We were barely meant to be seen at all, useful only for the most menial tasks, and occasionally for entertainment such as this. I've been away from my court for too long. The king's voice was deep, resonant, with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. I thought it wise to observe how things have been conducted in my absence. There was something in his tone, a subtle note of displeasure that made the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I risked another glance and found him watching not Lord Devereux, but me. His jaw was tense, a muscle ticking beneath the slight shadow of beard along his strong jawline. "We've maintained all traditions, Your Majesty," Lady Marceline interjected, moving forward with the fluid grace all high-born alphas possessed, including the traditional Omega dance for the Crimson Moon Feast. Traditional? The king's question hung in the air like the edge of a blade. I don't recall chained dancers being part of our court traditions. The hall fell silent. My feet stilled as the musicians, sensing the tension, let their notes fade into nothing. Lord Devereux cleared his throat. "A necessary precaution, Your Majesty. This particular Omega has rebellious tendencies. The chains are merely to ensure she doesn't forget her place." I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. No one had ever questioned my treatment before. No one had ever looked at me as though I were more than a possession, a thing to be used for entertainment and discarded. "Look at me, Omega." The king's command cut through the heavy silence. I hesitated, years of conditioning making me glance toward Lord Devereux for permission. I said, "Look at me." The king's voice was quieter now, but somehow more powerful for it. "When your king addresses you, you answer to no one else." Slowly, I raised my head and met his gaze directly. The court collectively inhaled. An Omega looking directly at an Alpha, especially the Alpha King, was considered the height of impropriety, but I couldn't look away. Not when his eyes held mine with such intensity. "What is your name?" he asked. My voice, unused except for yes and no for so long, emerged as little more than a whisper. "Lyra, Your Majesty, Lyra," he repeated, and something about the way my name sounded in his voice made my chest tighten. "Tell me, how long have you been forced to dance in chains for the amusement of my court?" The question was direct, impossible to evade. I swallowed hard, aware that every eye in the hall was fixed upon me, that whatever I said next might result in severe punishment once the king departed. 7 years, Your Majesty," I answered truthfully. "Since I was 13 and presented as an Omega." Something dark flickered across his face, a shadow of rage so potent that several courtiers nearest to him instinctively stepped back. "And who ordered these chains?" Lord Devereux stepped forward smoothly. "Your Majesty, perhaps this discussion would be better conducted in private. Court matters regarding Omega discipline are hardly—" I asked the Omega a question. The king cut him off, not even bothering to look in Lord Devereux's direction. "Answer me, Lyra." I felt trapped between two terrible choices: lie to protect myself from future retribution, or speak truth to my king. I thought of my grandmother's pendant against my skin, of her words about unchained spirits. "Lord Devereux ordered them, Your Majesty," I said, my voice gaining strength despite the fear coursing through me. After I refused certain requests of his." The implication hung in the air. Lord Devereux's face contorted with fury, but before he could speak, the king raised a hand, silencing him without a word. "Remove those chains," he commanded, addressing one of his royal guards who had followed him into the hall. "Now." The guard moved forward immediately, producing a key from somewhere on his uniform. Lord Devereux stepped forward, outrage overcoming his caution. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this Omega is court property. The management of Omegas has been under my jurisdiction as Lord Chancellor for the past decade, by royal decree." "A decree I'm now revoking," the king replied coldly. "It seems much has changed in my court during my campaigns. Changes I find deeply troubling." The guard knelt before me, unlocking the heavy manacles around my ankles. The chains fell away with a clatter that seemed to echo throughout the hall. I stood there, my ankles free for the first time in 7 years, unsure what to do with this sudden, unexpected freedom. "Come here, Lyra," the king said. his voice gentler now. On trembling legs, I walked toward him, acutely aware of the hateful glares from Lord Devereux and his allies. Each step without the weight of chains felt strange, unbalanced, as though I might float away without their anchoring weight. When I reached the king, he did something that caused another collective gasp from the court. He extended his hand to me, palm up, offering assistance as he would to a high-born lady, rather than a lowly Omega. "The feast continues," he announced to the court, his eyes never leaving mine, but with one change. "Tonight, this Omega dines at my table, not beneath it." And as I placed my hand in his, my small calloused fingers engulfed by his strong, warm grip, I felt something long dormant within me begin to unfurl. Something dangerous and beautiful and terrifying. The king guided me to the high table, his hand still holding mine. The warmth of his touch traveled up my arm, unfamiliar and terrifying in its gentleness. 7 years since anyone had touched me with anything but cruelty or indifference. 7 years of existing as furniture, as entertainment, as less than human. His scent enveloped me, pine forests after rainfall, sun-warmed stone, and something uniquely his, something that made my Omega instincts quiver with recognition. Every Omega learned early to identify alpha scents as a survival mechanism. But this was different. My senses were drowning in him, and I found myself unconsciously leaning closer, seeking more of that intoxicating fragrance. I caught myself and straightened, horrified at my body's betrayal. The court was watching, hundreds of eyes tracking our movement across the hall. I could feel their shock, their outrage, and beneath it all, their calculation. The nobles were already reassessing alliances, wondering what this unprecedented gesture meant. Was the king making a point about his authority? Or was there something more sinister in his interest in a lowly Omega? We reached the high table, and he guided me to a seat at his right hand, the position traditionally reserved for honored guests or potential mates. The whispers grew louder, less restrained. "Your Majesty." Lady Marceline's voice was tight with barely controlled fury as she approached the table. "That is my place." The king's gaze flicked to her, then away, dismissive. "Find another seat, Lady Marceline, or stand, I care not which." Color flooded her cheeks. "May I remind your Majesty that I am betrothed to Lord Devereux, who holds the position of Lord Chancellor. Protocol dictates that you obey your king without question," he interrupted, voice dangerously soft. "Unless you wish to challenge more than seating arrangements?" She blanched, the blood draining from her face as quickly as it had risen. No one challenged an Alpha King's authority directly. It was tantamount to treason. Lady Marceline bowed stiffly and retreated, finding a seat several places down. I stood frozen beside the ornate chair, uncertain what to do. The king noticed my hesitation and pulled the seat out for me himself. Another shocking breach of protocol that sent a fresh wave of whispers through the court. "Sit," he said, and though his voice was gentle, it still carried the undeniable weight of command. I sank into the chair, the plush cushion so different from the hard floor where I normally sat during feasts, waiting for scraps. The silverware gleamed, intimidating in its array. I had served at countless court dinners, but had never been permitted to eat at one. The king took his seat beside me, his powerful presence making the massive chair seem almost small. Under the table, his knee brushed against mine, and I flinched at the contact, my body's conditioned response to touch. He noticed. Of course he noticed, and shifted slightly to give me space. The small gesture of respect, of acknowledgement of my boundaries, made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. Servants rushed forward, placing plates before us. The aroma of roasted meat and herbs made my stomach clench painfully. I hadn't eaten properly in days, but I hesitated, hands in my lap, unsure if this was some elaborate trick. Perhaps they would snatch the food away just as I reached for it, another form of court entertainment at the Omega's expense. "Eat," the king murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. "You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign, a concept that belonged to someone else's life. I cautiously reached for a fork, half expecting Lord Devereux to materialize and strike my hand away. When no punishment came, I speared a piece of meat and brought it to my lips. The flavor exploded across my tongue. Rich, succulent, seasoned with herbs and spices I couldn't name. I couldn't stop the small sound of pleasure that escaped me, quickly stifled as I remembered where I was. Who I was. Good, isn't it? The king was watching me, something unreadable in his golden eyes. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He signaled a servant, who filled my goblet with deep red wine. Try this as well. It's from the southern vineyards. We took them back from the feral packs 3 summers ago. The casual reference to the war, to his victories, reminded me of who sat beside me. Not just any alpha, but the warrior king who had expanded our borders, who had slain countless enemies in battle. The stories of his ferocity, his tactical brilliance, his merciless pursuit of victory were legendary. So why was he being kind to me? What game was he playing? Across the table, Lord Devereux watched us with barely concealed hatred. His hands gripped his knife and fork so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. I knew that look. I had seen it countless times before punishment. Whatever reprieve the king's presence granted me would be temporary. Once the king returned to his war campaigns, I would pay dearly for this night. As though reading my thoughts, the king leaned closer. You're afraid of him. It wasn't a question. I kept my eyes on my plate, pushing food around rather than answering. Look at me, Lyra. Again, that command, impossible to resist. I raised my eyes to his. He will never touch you again, the king said, his voice a low rumble that I felt more than heard. You have my word. The vehemence in his tone, the absolute certainty, made me dizzy. Why? I whispered, the question escaping before I could stop it. His eyes darkened. Because what I've seen tonight tells me much about how my court has been run in my absence. And because no one, he paused, his gaze intensifying, no one should be treated as you have been. Before I could respond, a commotion at the hall's entrance drew our attention. A group of warriors entered, massive alphas with the distinctive silver armbands of the king's elite guard. They moved with lethal grace, their expressions grim as they surveyed the feast. Behind them came a slender figure in a hooded cloak, face hidden in shadow. The king stiffened beside me, then relaxed, a small smile touching his lips. Right on time, he murmured. The hooded figure approached our table, ignoring the whispers that followed. When they reached us, they dropped to one knee before the king, head bowed in deference. Rise, old friend, the king said warmly, and join us. The figure stood and pushed back the hood, revealing a face that made me gasp. She was an Omega, like me, but unlike any Omega I had ever seen. She stood tall, proud, her bearing more like an alpha's than the cowering posture Omegas were trained to adopt. Her hair was silver white, styled in intricate warrior braids, with metal beads that clinked softly when she moved. Most shocking of all was the sword at her hip. Omegas were forbidden from carrying weapons of any kind. May I present Thalia, captain of my shadow guard, the king announced, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. The silence that followed was absolute. An Omega captain. A female Omega bearing arms. It was unheard of. Against every tradition our society held sacred. An Omega cannot hold military rank, Lord Devereux sputtered, breaking the stunned silence. It's against our most ancient laws. Is it? The king raised an eyebrow. Strange. I've reviewed our ancient laws quite thoroughly during my campaigns. I found many interesting things, including the fact that such prohibitions date back only 3 generations, to my great-grandfather's reign, hardly ancient. Thalia's gaze swept the hall, assessing until it landed on me. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. Not of me personally, but of what I was, what had been done to me. Her hand tightened on her sword hilt, a small gesture of solidarity that brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Your Majesty, she addressed the king while still looking at me. The preparations we discussed are complete. He nodded. Excellent. We'll proceed after the feast. I glanced between them, confused by their cryptic exchange. What preparations? What did any of this have to do with me? The feast continued, the atmosphere thick with tension. I ate as much as my shrunken stomach could hold, aware that this might be my only chance at a proper meal for a long time. The king engaged me in conversation. Nothing demanding, simple questions about the foods I preferred, whether the wine was to my taste. He treated me as though I were a person of value, worth listening to. All the while, I felt Lord Devereux's gaze burning into me. I had survived 7 years by learning to read the moods of the court, especially his. The rage simmering in him now was different, deeper, more dangerous than I had ever witnessed. Whatever punishment he was planning would be severe. As the meal drew to a close, the king rose from his seat, commanding attention without a word. The hall fell silent, all eyes turning to him. "My loyal subjects," he began, his voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the vast space. "I have returned from our northern campaigns victorious, but I find disturbing changes in my absence." He paced slowly along the high table, his movements those of a predator, controlled and purposeful. "It seems some have forgotten the true values of our kingdom. They have twisted our traditions to serve their own desires for power and cruelty." His gaze swept over Lord Devereux and his allies. "That ends tonight." The atmosphere shifted, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Guards moved silently into position around the hall, hands on sword hilts. Tonight marks not only the crimson moon, but a return to the old ways, the true ways. The king's voice dropped, becoming almost hypnotic in its intensity. When alphas protected rather than exploited, when omegas were valued for their unique gifts rather than treated as property. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd. The king ignored them, continuing relentlessly. "My first decree upon my return. All omegas currently held in servitude are hereby freed. Any chains, collars, or bonds are to be removed immediately." Gasps and shouts of protest erupted. Lord Devereux surged to his feet. "Your Majesty, this is madness. Omegas are naturally subservient. They need direction, control. Without proper constraints, they become unstable, dangerous even." "Is that so?" The king's voice was deadly quiet. "Tell me, Lord Devereux, what dangerous act did this Omega commit to deserve 7 years in chains?" All eyes turned to me. I felt myself shrinking under their scrutiny, the weight of their judgment pressing down on me like a physical force. "She attacked a high-born alpha," Lord Devereux declared, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She nearly killed Lord Marceline's brother when he rightfully claimed mating rights." The memory flashed through my mind. Unwanted hands on my body, tearing at my clothes, the sickening scent of an alpha in rut, the kitchen knife I'd grabbed in desperation, the blood, the screams. They had beaten me unconscious afterward, and when I woke, the chains were already around my ankles. "Is that true, Lyra?" the king asked softly. I met his gaze, suddenly beyond fear. What more could they do to me now? "I defended myself against rape, Your Majesty," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I chose chains over forced mating." The king's eyes flared with something primal. Rage, yes, but something else too. Something that made my heart race and my skin flush with heat, "as any person has the right to do," he said, turning back to the stunned court. "Tonight marks the beginning of change. Those who cannot accept this new direction are free to leave my kingdom with nothing but the clothes on their backs." He turned to Captain Thalia, who had been standing silently nearby. "Begin the ceremony of unbinding, starting with her." He gestured toward me. Thalia stepped forward, drawing a small silver dagger from her belt. The blade caught the light, gleaming with an almost otherworldly blue sheen. "What is happening?" I whispered, fear returning as she approached with the weapon. The king's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "Trust me," he murmured. "What happens next will change everything." Thalia approached me with the strange dagger, its blade shimmering with that unearthly blue light. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the king's hand remained on mine, anchoring me. "Lyra of House Nowhere, Omega without lineage," Thalia intoned formally, her voice carrying through the now silent hall. "Will you accept the unbinding?" I glanced at the king, confusion and fear warring within me. He nodded once, encouragement in his golden eyes. I accept," I whispered, not knowing what I was agreeing to, but trusting him in a way that defied all logic and experience. Thalia raised the dagger, and several nobles gasped, clearly expecting her to attack me. Instead, she drew the blade across her own palm. Blood welled, dark against her skin, but with that same strange blue luminescence flickering within it. "Blood of the free, freely given," she said, extending her bleeding hand toward me. "Take what was always your birthright." My grandmother's pendant suddenly felt hot against my skin, burning through the thin fabric of my dancing dress. Without conscious thought, I reached for it, pulling it out into the open. A collective hiss swept through the hall. Even Lord Devereux took a step back, his face pale with shock. "The Omega Queen symbol," someone whispered. "It's forbidden." The wooden pendant, carved with the ancient spiral surrounded by 3 moons, seemed to pulse in my hand, responding to Thalia's blood. Understanding dawned on me, not just any Omega, but an Omega like me, one who carried the old bloodline. "You knew," I said to the king, realization crashing over me. "You knew what I was from the moment you saw me." His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. "I suspected. Now I'm certain." With trembling fingers, I reached for Thalia's bleeding hand. When our palms met, her blood touching mine, a shock ran through my body like lightning. Every sense heightened instantly. Scents became richer, colors brighter, sounds clearer. Most startling was the sudden awareness of everyone in the room, as though I could feel their emotions pressing against my skin. Fear, anger, curiosity, desire. "What's happening to me?" I gasped, overwhelmed by the sensations flooding through me. "The suppression is breaking," Thalia explained, her voice gentle. "Your true nature returning." The pendant in my hand began to glow with the same blue light as the dagger and Thalia's blood. The light spread, traveling up my arm in delicate, vine-like patterns beneath my skin. I wasn't afraid anymore. Something deep within recognized this magic, welcomed it home like a long-lost friend. "Stop this heresy," Lord Devereux shouted, lunging forward. 2 guards blocked his path immediately, their swords drawn. "This is dark magic, forbidden by our ancestors. The Omega Witch Queens nearly destroyed our kingdom centuries ago." "Is that the history you were taught, Lord Devereux?" The king's voice was cold with contempt. How convenient that those in power should rewrite history to demonize those they feared. The blue light continued to spread across my body, wrapping around me like an embrace. With it came flashes of memory, not my own, but older, ancient. Women with my eyes, my hands, wielding power that had nothing to do with physical strength and everything to do with something deeper, more primal. "The true history," the king continued, addressing the entire court now, "is that Omega Queens once ruled alongside Alpha Kings in perfect balance. Their empathic abilities allowed them to sense deception, to heal rifts between packs, to maintain harmony. They were respected, even revered, until those who craved absolute power decided that balance was inconvenient. The blue light intensified, and suddenly I was rising from my chair, lifted by some invisible force. My feet left the ground as the light enveloped me completely. I should have been terrified, but instead I felt a profound sense of rightness, of coming home to myself. Through the veil of blue light, I saw the king watching me, awe, and something else, something hungry, in his expression. Memories continued to flood through me. Generations of Omega Queens, their knowledge, their experiences becoming part of me. I saw the betrayal that had ended their reign, the systematic hunting and suppression of Omega bloodlines with a gift. I saw my grandmother hiding her pendant, teaching me to conceal my true nature, warning me that to reveal it meant death. And then I understood why she had sent me to the court 7 years ago, despite knowing what would happen to me there. She had sensed the king's return, had known he would recognize what I was if only I could survive long enough. The light began to recede, sinking beneath my skin like water into parched earth. As it faded, I felt its power settling into my bones, my blood, my very essence. I lowered gently back to the ground, my bare feet touching the cold marble floor. I was changed. The fear that had been my constant companion for 7 years was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. I straightened my spine and raised my chin. No longer the cowering Omega, but something else entirely. The unbinding is complete, Thalia announced, bowing deeply to me. Not to the king, but to me. Lord Devereux's face contorted with rage and fear. "Guards!" he shouted. "Seize the witch! This is treason against our most sacred traditions." But not a single guard moved. They stood motionless, watching the king for commands. "Your traditions," the king said quietly, "not mine. Not the kingdom's true traditions." He stepped forward, placing himself between me and Lord Devereux. "You would do well to remember who holds the throne, Lord Chancellor, and who commands the armies. The council will not stand for this," Lord Devereux hissed. "The noble houses will adapt or fall," the king interrupted. "I did not spend 5 years securing our borders to return to a kingdom rotting from within." He turned to address the gathered nobles. "Let me be perfectly clear. The old ways are returning. Omegas will be freed, educated, and respected. Those with the empathic gift will be trained, not suppressed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some outraged, but others curious, even hopeful. I realized with surprise that not all the court shared Lord Devereux's views. Some had followed out of fear or tradition, not conviction. "But centuries of order," Lady Marceline began. "Centuries of subjugation," I said, my voice strong and clear, in a way it had never been before. All eyes turned to me, shocked that an Omega would interrupt a high-born Alpha. "Centuries of lies about what Omegas truly are. We were never meant to be servants or playthings. We were healers, advisors, peacekeepers." I could feel the truth of my words resonating through the bond the unbinding had created, a connection to those ancient queens whose blood ran in my veins. "And what will stop these freed Omegas from seeking revenge for their treatment?" Lord Devereux demanded. "What will prevent chaos once they realize their chains are gone?" I stepped forward until I stood shoulder to shoulder with the king. "The same thing that stopped me from slitting your throat in your sleep 100 times over these past 7 years, I said quietly. "The understanding that vengeance perpetuates suffering, that true power lies in breaking cycles, not continuing them." The king's eyes met mine, approval and something warmer shining in their golden depths. Without warning, he took my hand and raised it high, our fingers intertwined. "Tonight marks the beginning of a new era," he declared. "Or rather, the return of the old one. Tonight, I claim this Omega as my equal, my counterbalance. Tonight, the Omega Queen returns to her rightful place." Gasps echoed through the hall. Whatever they had expected, it wasn't this. "You cannot be serious," Lord Devereux spluttered. "She's a nobody, a nameless Omega who's spent 7 years as entertainment." "She carries the bloodline of the ancient queens," the king countered, "and she has survived your cruelty with her spirit intact. I can think of no one better suited to help heal the rifts in our kingdom." My head spun with the implications of his words. Queen? Me? It seemed impossible, ludicrous. Yet the new awareness within me hummed with recognition, with rightness. "I have not agreed to this," I said softly, for his ears alone. A smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. "I know. I would not force any bond upon you, Lyra. The choice will be yours when you're ready to make it." Relief and something dangerously close to disappointment mingled in my chest. I pushed both aside, focusing on the immediate crisis. Lord Devereux was not finished. He stepped forward, his hand moving to the ceremonial dagger at his belt. "This is not just about tradition or politics," he snarled. "This is about the natural order. Alphas dominate, Omegas submit. That is the way of things, the way they have always been and always will be." Before anyone could react, he lunged forward, dagger drawn. His target was not the king as I expected, but me. Time seemed to slow. I saw the blade arcing toward me, knew I should move, should scream, should do something. But 7 years of conditioning had taught me to accept punishment, to submit to pain, a blur of movement, a flash of steel. And Thalia was there, her sword meeting Lord Devereux's dagger, with a ringing clash that echoed through the hall. "The old order dies tonight," she growled, her Omega status seemingly forgotten as she fought with the skill and ferocity of an alpha warrior, along with its defenders if necessary. Lord Devereux stumbled back, shock written across his features. An Omega had not only defied him, but bested him in combat. His worldview was crumbling before his eyes. "Arrest him," the king commanded, his voice hard with fury, "for attempted murder of the future queen." Guards moved forward, surrounding Lord Devereux, who stood frozen in disbelief. "This isn't over," he said, his eyes fixed on me with hatred so intense it felt like a physical blow. "The council will never accept an Omega queen. The noble houses will rebel. You've started a war you cannot win." The king stepped closer to him, his presence suddenly overwhelming, dominating the space in a way that reminded everyone exactly why he was feared on the battlefield. "I've won every war I've ever fought, Lord Devereux," he said softly. "Do you really wish to test me in this one?" As the guards led Lord Devereux away, the king turned back to me. The fierce warrior who had just threatened war was gone, replaced by a man whose eyes held questions, vulnerability, hope. "Are you all right?" he asked. I nodded, unable to find words. So much had changed in the span of a single evening. This morning, I had been a chained dancer, less than human in the eyes of the court. Now I stood unbound, with ancient power flowing through my veins, and a king looking at me as though I were the answer to a question he'd been asking his entire life. "What happens now?" I whispered. "Now," he said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch feather-light and careful. "We rebuild. Together, if you're willing." In his golden eyes, I saw not just desire or political calculation, but genuine hope. This fierce Alpha King truly believed in the old ways, in the balance between Alpha strength and Omega wisdom. He had fought wars, unified territories, faced countless enemies, yet here he stood, offering me a choice he could easily have taken away. And in that moment, standing before the court that had tormented me for 7 years, feeling the new power coursing through my veins and the weight of generations of Omega Queens in my blood, I made my decision. "I am willing," I said, my voice steady and clear, "not as your subject, not as your possession, but as your equal." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a long storm. He extended his hand to me, palm up, offering, not demanding. I placed my hand in his, our fingers intertwining. "Equals," he agreed, and the promise in that single word felt stronger than any chain had ever been. The weeks that followed the Crimson Moon Feast were unlike anything I could have imagined. The palace transformed around me. Or perhaps I was the one transforming, seeing it through new eyes, eyes unclouded by fear and hunger. Corridors that had once felt like prison passages now opened into sunlit chambers I'd never been permitted to enter. Gardens I'd glimpsed only through windows became havens where I could walk freely, trailing my fingers through blooming flowers, their scents sharp and sweet in my newly heightened senses. The king, Orion, insisted I take quarters in the royal wing, a suite of rooms larger than the entire servants' dormitory, where I'd spent the last 7 years. The first night, I couldn't sleep in the massive bed with its silk sheets and mountain of pillows. It felt wrong, dangerous somehow, as though I were trespassing in a forbidden place. I ended up curled on the floor beside the hearth, wrapped in a single blanket, the way I'd slept for years. That's where Thalia found me the next morning, her expression softening with understanding rather than pity. "It takes time," she said simply, helping me to my feet. "The body remembers captivity long after the chains are gone." She became my guide in this new world, teaching me what it meant to be an unbounded Omega. Each morning, we trained in a private courtyard, not just physical combat, but techniques to control and direct my empathic abilities, which grew stronger daily. "Your gift was stunted by the suppression," she explained, as we sat cross-legged on the stone floor, practicing the focused breathing that helped manage the overwhelming flood of others' emotions. "It's like a stream that's been dammed for years. Now that the dam is broken, the water rushes forth with greater force than it would have if allowed to flow naturally. The empathic gift was both blessing and curse. I could sense deception instantly, could feel the undercurrents of emotion beneath polite court masks. But in crowds, the sensations became overwhelming, hundreds of emotional signatures pressing against my consciousness, demanding attention. "How do you bear it?" I asked Thalia one morning, after a particularly difficult session, where I'd been unable to block out the churning anxiety of a group of nobles gathered in a nearby chamber. She smiled, the expression making her severe features momentarily softer. Practice, time, and purpose. She tapped her sword hilt. I channel it into protection. Every emotion I sense becomes information. Who is a threat? Who is an ally? Who needs help but cannot ask for it? And what should my purpose be? I asked, voicing the question that had haunted me since the night of the unbinding. Thalia's gaze was direct, unflinching. That, Lyra, is something only you can answer. The king. I still couldn't think of him as Orion in my mind, though he had requested it. Gave me space to adjust, to find my footing in this new reality. He never pressed for more than I could give, never assumed rights over my person or time. Our interactions were formal but warm, careful but honest. He sought my counsel on matters of court, valuing my ability to sense the emotional currents underlying political maneuvers. Yet beneath the careful courtesy, I felt the constant pull between us, a connection that defied logic or experience. My body responded to his presence in ways that both thrilled and terrified me. When he entered a room, my senses sharpened, focused entirely on him, his scent, his movements, the sound of his voice. It was instinctual, primal, beyond my control. I knew he felt it too. I caught his gaze lingering when he thought I wouldn't notice, saw how his hands clenched at his sides when we stood close, as though physically restraining himself from reaching for me. 1 month after the unbinding, the Council of Noble Houses convened to address the changes sweeping through the kingdom. As the king had predicted, resistance was fierce, particularly from the older houses with the most to lose from Omega liberation. Your Majesty's edicts have thrown our society into chaos, Lord Blackwell declared, his aging face flushed with indignation. Omegas abandoning their posts, demanding payment for services, even refusing mating claims from respectable alphas. The natural order is collapsing around us. We sat in the Grand Council chamber, an imposing circular room with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with scenes from our kingdom's mythology. The king occupied the central throne, with me seated beside him in a chair that, while slightly smaller, was positioned at equal height, a symbolic statement that was lost on no one. What you call chaos, Lord Blackwell, I call necessary correction, the king replied, his tone mild but his eyes hard. And what you call the natural order was nothing more than generations of systematic oppression. And the economy? Who will perform the essential services that Omegas have traditionally provided? Lady Valeria interjected, her question seemingly reasonable, though I sensed the malice beneath it. They will perform the same services, if they choose to, I said, speaking for the first time in the council meeting. All eyes turned to me, some narrowing with barely concealed contempt. But they will be compensated fairly, housed properly, and treated with dignity. The Treasury cannot sustain such expenses, Lord Blackwell scoffed. The kingdom would be bankrupt within a year. The king leaned forward. Strange. My wars in the north cost 10 times what fair wages for Omegas would require, yet I don't recall you raising economic concerns when we expanded our territory. Lord Blackwell flushed darker. That was different. Military expenditures are investments in the kingdom's security and prosperity. And this is an investment in the kingdom's soul, I countered, my voice stronger than I'd expected. A kingdom built on the suffering of a third of its population is already bankrupt, morally, if not financially. A ripple of reaction passed through the council. Outrage from some, thoughtful consideration from others. I felt their emotions washing over me. Anger, fear, uncertainty. And from a few of the younger nobles, a hesitant hope. The debate continued for hours, circular arguments and thinly veiled threats mixing with genuine concerns and practical questions. Through it all, the king remained steadfast, neither yielding nor losing his temper. I found myself admiring his patience, his strategic mind that anticipated arguments before they were made, his ability to find compromise without sacrificing principle. As the session drew to a close, Lord Blackwell rose for a final statement. Your Majesty, while we respect your authority, many of us remain unconvinced that this Omega, he gestured dismissively toward me, possesses the legendary abilities you claim justify her elevated position. The old stories speak of Omega queens who could heal with a touch, who could sense falsehood and truth, who could calm territorial disputes between warring packs. We have seen no such evidence. A murmur of agreement rippled through his allies. I felt the king tense beside me, preparing to defend me, but I placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "You raise a fair concern, Lord Blackwell," I said, rising from my seat. "Words and legends mean little without demonstration." I descended from the dais and approached the elderly lord, stopping before him. Up close, I could see the web of burst blood vessels across his nose and cheeks, the yellowing of his eyes that spoke of a liver struggling against years of excess. But more than his physical ailments, I sensed the emotions churning beneath his hostile exterior. Fear, yes, but also pain, grief, a deep and abiding loneliness. "May I?" I asked, extending my hand. Suspicion flared in his rheumy eyes, but with the entire council watching, he could hardly refuse without appearing fearful. He nodded stiffly. I placed my palm against his chest, directly over his heart, and closed my eyes. The connection formed instantly, not just to his emotions now, but to the tangled web of memories and wounds that had shaped them. I saw a young Omega woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. I felt the love he'd borne her, the devastation when illness took her 50 years ago. I felt the hardening of his heart afterward, the deliberate choice to believe that Omegas were lesser beings, because how else could he bear the loss of one who had meant everything? "Elaine," I whispered, the name coming to me through the connection. She wore lavender oil and sang while she worked in the garden. Her hands were always stained with soil, no matter how often she washed them. Lord Blackwell stiffened, his emotional signature flaring with shock, and something dangerously close to hope. "She didn't suffer at the end," I continued, the knowledge flowing through me from a source I couldn't name. "She slipped away peacefully, thinking of the spring flowers she'd planted that would bloom after she was gone. Thinking of you, and how much she loved you, despite everything." Tears welled in his ancient eyes, spilling down his weathered cheeks. His hands shook as he reached up to cover mine, still pressed against his heart. "How could you know?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "No one knew about the garden, about the lavender. We kept it secret. An Alpha Lord couldn't openly cherish an Omega in those days." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze. "Because she was more than what they told you she was. More than a possession or a convenience. She was your equal in every way that mattered. You knew it then, in your heart. You've spent 50 years trying to forget it." Something broke in him, a dam of grief and denial that had stood for half a century. He crumpled forward, his forehead coming to rest against my shoulder as sobs racked his frail body. I held him, absorbing the torrent of emotions, channeling them, transforming grief into a gentler, healing sorrow. The council chamber had fallen completely silent, every eye fixed on the impossible scene of one of the kingdom's most powerful and notorious Alpha Lords, weeping in the arms of an Omega who had been dancing in chains just weeks ago. When Lord Blackwell finally straightened, his face was transformed. Decades of bitterness softened, if not erased. "I withdraw my objection," he said, his voice rough but clear. "The old stories, they were true after all." The mood in the chamber shifted perceptibly. Even the most resistant council members looked shaken by what they had witnessed. It was one thing to debate policy and tradition. It was another to see the legendary empathic gift demonstrated so powerfully before their eyes. As I returned to my seat beside the king, his hand found mine, squeezing gently. His touch sent warmth cascading through me, along with something deeper, pride, admiration, and that ever-present current of desire that neither of us had acted upon. "You continue to surprise me," he murmured. "I surprise myself," I admitted. The council session concluded shortly after, with tentative agreement to implement the king's reforms gradually, beginning with the immediate liberation of all chained Omegas and the establishment of fair labor practices. It was far from a complete victory, but it was a beginning. As we left the chamber, the king guided me toward a secluded balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The evening air was cool against my flushed skin, scented with night-blooming flowers. For a long moment, we stood in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "What you did with Lord Blackwell," he finally said, was remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. I leaned against the stone balustrade, suddenly tired from the emotional expenditure. I didn't know I could do that until I did it. It was like something ancient moved through me, showing me the way. He moved closer, his warmth a tangible presence at my side. The old texts speak of Omega Queens, who could heal hearts as well as bodies, who could see the wounds beneath the armor and mend what was broken. Is that why you searched for me? I asked, the question that had burned within me since the night of the unbinding finally finding voice. For my abilities? For what I could do for your kingdom? He turned to face me fully, his golden eyes reflecting the starlight. At first, perhaps, I spent years in the Northern Territories, fighting endless battles, watching good people die for land and power. Somewhere in the midst of all that blood, I began to question what kind of kingdom I was fighting to protect. I found the old histories, the true accounts of how alphas and omegas once ruled together in balance. His hand came up, hesitant, before gently tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple touch sent shivers across my skin. I returned determined to restore that balance, to find an omega of the old bloodline if any still existed. His voice dropped lower, intimate in the growing darkness. But what I found was not just a bloodline or an ability. I found you, Lyra. Your courage, your compassion even after years of cruelty, your strength that has nothing to do with physical power. My heart thundered in my chest, responding to the intensity in his gaze, in his words. And what am I to you now? I whispered. Everything, he said simply. Everything I never knew I was missing. Everything I want, but will not take unless freely given. The air between us seemed to vibrate with tension, with possibility. 7 weeks ago, I had been a possession, an entertainment, less than human in the eyes of the court. Now I stood before the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, his equal in position if not yet in my own mind, with the power to choose. I'm still learning who I am, I said softly, who I can be now that the chains are gone. I don't know yet what I want, he nodded, accepting my truth without resentment. Then I will wait, he said, for as long as it takes. In his eyes I saw no disappointment, only understanding, and that unwavering patience that seemed so at odds with everything I'd been taught about alphas and their needs. In that moment, I realized he truly meant what he said, that my choice mattered more to him than his own desires. And something shifted within me, a final link in the invisible chains of my past breaking free. Without thinking, I reached up and touched his face, my fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. His skin was warm beneath my touch, slightly rough with the day's growth of beard. He remained perfectly still, though I felt the tremendous restraint it cost him, the effort not to lean into my touch, not to take more than I offered. Orion, I said, using his name for the first time. It felt right on my lips, natural in a way nothing had felt since the unbinding. His eyes darkened at the sound of his name, pupils dilating until only a thin ring of gold remained. Yes, Lyra. I may not know exactly what I want yet, I whispered, moving closer until I could feel the heat of his body, smell the intoxicating scent of him, pine and stone and something uniquely his. But I know I want to find out, with you. The last walls of restraint crumbled in his eyes. Slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips hovered just above mine. May I? He asked, his voice rough with need but still, always, seeking permission rather than assuming right. In answer, I closed the final distance between us, pressing my lips to his. The world fell away. There was only this moment, this connection, this alpha, who had freed me from physical chains and waited patiently while I freed myself from the invisible ones. His arms encircled me, strong but gentle, holding me as though I were something precious, something cherished. My hands found their way into his hair, silk between my fingers as I pulled him closer, deepening the kiss from hesitant exploration to something hungrier, more primal. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, I saw the same wonder in his eyes that I felt flooding through me. Not just desire, though that was there in abundance, but something deeper, more profound. A recognition of something that had been written in our souls long before we met. "My queen," he murmured, the words both acknowledgement and question. I smiled, feeling truly free for the first time in my life. "My king," I answered, making my choice at last. Above us, the 3 moons of our world shone down, crimson, silver, and blue, just as they had in the ancient days when alphas and omegas ruled together in perfect balance. Just as they would in the days to come, watching over a kingdom reborn, a people healing, and 2 souls who had found each other across impossible divides. The chains that had bound me were gone, transformed into something stronger, but infinitely more precious, bonds of choice, of respect, of love freely given and received. And in that transformation lay not just my liberation, but the kingdom's as well.